What if the moment you laughed at someone's accent was the same moment they revealed a brilliance that shook your entire world? That's exactly what happened when a billionaire mocked a black waitress in a crowded restaurant. Seconds later, she responded in flawless Chinese, flipping his power, his pride, and even his empire upside down. Stay tuned, and if stories of power, justice, and unexpected twists excite you, hit that subscribe button right now, because you don't want to miss what happens next. New York City sparkled under the night sky, and inside the Grand Regent Hotel, the most prestigious dining hall on Fifth Avenue, wealth dripped from every corner as chandeliers spilled golden light across polished tables dressed in white linen and gleaming silverware, where senators, CEOs, and investors sat laughing too loudly and drinking too much wine, while the staff moved like shadows, quiet and unseen, except for Maya Johnson, a young black waitress whose calm grace made her uniform look like evening wear, though her soft southern accent betrayed her roots every time she spoke, an accent that drew the cruel attention of Adrian Cole, a billionaire whose entire presence radiated arrogance, his suit tailored to perfection, his platinum watch ticking with the arrogance of power, and his laughter booming like thunder as he turned Maya into his target, mocking her when she asked if he preferred still or sparkling water, stretching her vowels into a grotesque performance for the amusement of his wealthy companions, who erupted into laughter as if cruelty itself were part of the entertainment, their eyes shining not with compassion, but with the shallow approval that kept them within Adrian's orbit. And though Maya felt the sting burn through her chest, she refused to flinch, remembering her mother's words about never bending under the weight of mockery, so she poured the water steadily, her hands unwavering even as the room rang with laughter, only for Adrian to lean back in his velvet chair, swirling wine and raising his voice above the clamor, challenging her with smug contempt as he told her to try saying that again, if you can, sending another wave of silence through the hall as everyone waited for the waitress to stumble, to break, to give them more reason to laugh. But instead Maya set down the jug carefully, her spine straightening, her eyes locking on his with a quiet fire that no one at that table expected. And in that instant the air shifted, the atmosphere thickened, and though no one yet knew it, the man who believed he could humiliate her without consequence was seconds away from discovering that the accent he mocked was not a weakness, but the curtain hiding a power that would soon silence the entire room. The silence that followed Adrian's smug challenge hung heavy in the dining hall, a silence so sharp it cut through the clinking glasses and rustling napkins, and all eyes shifted from the billionaire in his velvet chair to the waitress in her simple uniform, who now stood with her chin lifted, her hands no longer trembling but steady as steel, and while Adrian smirked, certain she would falter or stumble or mumble something that would give him another excuse to mock her accent, Maya drew a breath, not in English this time, but in Mandarin Chinese, her words flowing like silk, each syllable precise, melodic, and impossibly flawless. So perfect that even the Chinese ambassador seated at the far end of the table froze with his fork midair, his eyes widening at the sound of a tongue spoken with the clarity of someone who had not only studied but mastered its intricacies, and the laughter that had just moments ago bounced off the gilded walls now died a swift death as shock took its place. Faces that had been lit with amusement now drained of expression, mouths hung open, and Adrian's smirk faltered into confusion, then disbelief, and finally a flicker of something he had not felt in years: fear. Maya did not rush her words. She recited a proverb about humility and respect that translated to, "Mocking others is like spitting into the sky. It always falls back on your own face." And though few in the room understood the meaning, the weight of her tone carried enough authority to silence the wealthy predators who had moments ago feasted on her humiliation, and the ambassador, breaking the tension, translated aloud with pride, amplifying the sting of her words until Adrian himself felt the sting of being the punchline. For Maya, the moment was not about revenge, but about revelation. Because the truth was that she had not always been a waitress. She had once been a top student of international law, a polyglot who spoke 5 languages with ease, a young woman, destined for diplomatic work until her mother fell gravely ill. Hospital bills buried her family in debt, and the bright future she had dreamed of crumbled into nights spent serving those who could afford $100 plates. But through it all, she had refused to let her mind go dull, memorizing phrases, practicing late at night, and holding on to her gift of languages like a lifeline. And now that gift had broken free in the most unexpected of stages. The guests whispered in shock, some impressed, others embarrassed at their laughter, while Adrian sat red-faced, gripping the stem of his wine glass so tightly it threatened to snap, and though he tried to regain control with a scoff, mumbling something about how knowing a language meant nothing without wealth, it was too late. Because in the span of a few flawless sentences, Maya had shifted the balance of the room, turning his arrogance into his humiliation, and the man who thought himself untouchable now found himself cornered by the very woman he had tried to belittle. Though neither of them yet knew that this night would only be the beginning of a storm that reached far beyond a dining hall, a storm that would soon threaten the empire Adrian Cole had built on pride and corruption. The morning after the dinner that had left the city's elite buzzing with whispers about the waitress who spoke perfect Chinese, Adrian Cole sat in his office high above Manhattan, his floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the skyline he believed he owned. But his confidence was rattled. The humiliation of the night still gnawing at him, replaying the sound of Maya's flawless voice in a language he had spent millions trying and failing to master. And though he told himself it was nothing, just a minor embarrassment, the cracks in his empire had already begun to show, for in the inboxes of journalists and government agencies across the globe, a flood of documents had surfaced. Secret files exposing offshore accounts, fraudulent contracts, shell companies in tax havens, and bribery trails that led directly back to Adrian's conglomerate. And as the press began circling, shareholders started to panic, pulling out investments and demanding explanations. While in Beijing, a coalition of watchdog groups confirmed that the leaks were authentic, their accuracy undeniable, and the strange coincidence was that many of the files were annotated in Mandarin, as if deliberately aimed at a Chinese-speaking audience, which only deepened Adrian's paranoia as he remembered Maya standing in that dining hall, speaking with the confidence of a diplomat, not a waitress. And though he tried to dismiss the thought that she had anything to do with it, the seed of suspicion took root and grew. Because what Adrian did not know was that Maya had been living a double life. Her nights, spent serving wine and clearing plates, while her days, stolen in fragments between shifts, were dedicated to working. Quietly, with a network of investigative lawyers and journalists who had recognized her talents and recruited her to help decode and translate documents that tied billionaires like Adrian to global corruption. And with her linguistic brilliance, she had pieced together patterns, traced signatures, and connected dots across continents, all while carrying trays through glittering halls where the very men she was helping expose dined and bragged openly, assuming the staff were invisible, never realizing that every careless word was being stored in the memory of the woman they mocked. And now the net was closing, headlines screaming about Adrian's hidden dealings, governments announcing inquiries, and investors vanishing overnight while Adrian himself, pacing his office like a trapped predator, hired private investigators to dig into Maya's life, desperate to find something to smear her with, unaware that every move he made only tightened the trap, for the truth was no longer a secret he could bury with money. It was a storm already unleashed, and at the center of it all stood Maya Johnson, the waitress he had tried to humiliate, whose quiet dignity had turned into a weapon sharper than any blade, a weapon that was about to bring him to his knees. The empire of Adrian Cole collapsed not with a bang, but with 1,000 cracks that spread faster than he could patch, and within weeks of that humiliating night in the Grand Regent Hotel, the Billionaire, who once commanded boardrooms with a snap of his fingers, found himself trapped in a web of headlines, lawsuits, and criminal inquiries. His name no longer celebrated in glossy magazines, but plastered across newspapers under words like fraud, bribery, and investigation. And the very investors who had laughed at Maya's accent now distanced themselves, liquidating shares, releasing statements of shock and betrayal, while politicians who once begged for his donations now denied ever knowing him. And yet the worst blow was not the crumbling of his wealth, but the public spectacle of his humiliation. For the video of that dinner had leaked, showing clearly the moment he mocked a waitress only to be silenced by her flawless Mandarin, a clip that went viral in both the United States and the United Kingdom, played on talk shows, dissected on news channels, shared millions of times on social media with captions like, "Respect has no accent," and "The waitress who taught a billionaire a lesson," turning Maya Johnson into an overnight symbol of dignity and quiet rebellion. And while Adrian's lawyers scrambled to suppress the footage, claiming it was manipulated, the damage was irreversible. The world had already chosen its hero and its villain, and no amount of money could shift that narrative. Maya, who had once struggled to pay her mother's hospital bills, now stood surrounded by reporters as she left the courthouse, her mother's hand in hers. No longer just a waitress, but the face of a movement that celebrated intelligence hidden. In plain sight, her backstory finally revealed to the world: her academic brilliance, her mastery of languages, her sacrifices made for family. And rather than pity, the public offered admiration, seeing in her the resilience of countless people whose talents had been buried beneath poverty, prejudice, and circumstance. And this recognition did not just change her life, it ignited opportunities she never dreamed possible. Scholarships reopened, universities reached out, human rights organizations begged her to join, and soon she was not serving tables but standing at conferences, giving speeches about justice, equality, and the dangerous arrogance of power. Her voice now amplified across continents. Meanwhile, Adrian, stripped of his fortune, faced trial for fraud and corruption, his assets frozen, his accounts exposed, his allies abandoning him one by one, until the man who once mocked another's voice now found himself voiceless in court, stammering before judges and investigators who showed him none of the deference he was used to, and every word he spoke only reminded the world of the irony that had undone him. The irony that his downfall began not with a competitor or a rival, but with the woman he thought beneath him, a waitress with an accent he laughed at, whose dignity he underestimated, whose intelligence he mocked. And when the verdict finally came, guilty on multiple counts, Adrian sat broken, no longer a lion but a caged animal, the echoes of his own laughter haunting him like ghosts of arrogance past. And yet Maya, when asked by reporters if she had any words for him, did not gloat or spit venom. She simply smiled with the same quiet grace she had carried in that dining hall and said in a calm, steady voice that carried across microphones, "Try saying that in any language you like. The truth doesn't need translation." A line that would be quoted in headlines, etched into posters, printed on T-shirts, a line that would outlive both his wealth and his shame, because it captured in one breath the essence of the story, that dignity cannot be mocked, that brilliance hides in unexpected places, and that sometimes the smallest voice in the room carries the power to silence the loudest laughter. And as Maya walked away from the courthouse into the roar of applause, her mother at her side and a new future unfolding before her, the world knew they had witnessed not just the fall of a billionaire, but the rise of a legend. And in that rise, millions found hope that arrogance will always collapse, but truth, no matter the accent it wears, will always endure.